Ascent Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents HBR Guide to Critical Thinking by Harvard Business Review. Narrated by Karen Ruth Johnston and Brandon Pollock. Publisher's note. This audiobook has bonus material. Please contact whomever you purchased this audiobook from to request the material. All figures and tables referenced in this audiobook can be found in the bonus material. What you'll learn. Do curiosity and logic guide you to innovative solutions at work? Do you seek outside perspectives when solving tough problems? Do you recognize the importance of data in decision-making? When you're navigating a complex scenario, critical thinking is an essential skill for exploring potential paths ahead of you. But it's not always so simple. You must be able to hold your hypotheses loosely, examine all aspects of a situation, keep your mind open to new and contradictory information, and use quantitative and qualitative research to back up your choices. Fortunately, you can learn critical thinking. This guide will provide you with the advice and tips you need to understand and apply key elements of this important skill. From taking a hard look at the problem and asking the right questions, to seeking differing perspectives and analyzing information so that you can make smarter thinking a habit and reach better outcomes. You'll learn to see why critical thinking is essential to your career growth. Recognize and detach yourself from your assumptions. Decide quickly with reflexive urgency. Ask questions to better understand the problem. Think scientifically to avoid unconscious bias. Assess data carefully to gain an evidence-based perspective. Remain open-minded when listening to other people's opinions. Become an integrative thinker to find creative solutions. Use the elements of critical thinking to enhance your learning. Introduction. What is critical thinking? Knowing how to think critically is essential for professional growth, especially if you aspire to leadership positions. Anyone working in today's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world needs to see a problem in different ways to ensure that the best solutions rise to the top. But too many of us don't think carefully about the situation we're facing. We move forward too quickly, relying on the same behaviors and solutions that helped us succeed in the past. We fall victim to cognitive biases and blind spots and miss new, potentially better opportunities. Organizations are looking for people who bring forth innovative ideas and new ways of thinking. According to the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs Report 2020, business leaders across the world see critical thinking and analysis as a skill growing in demand. A SHRM report finds that critical thinking is one of the most in-demand skills for job candidates, but is also one that is commonly missing. What exactly is critical thinking? The concept has been discussed, studied, and debated for decades. Former consultant Helen Lee Bouygues wrote that it is reasoning through pressing issues, taking the time to evaluate a topic from all sides. She is the founder and president of the Reboot Foundation, which describes it in more detail. The ultimate goal of critical thinking is to think reflectively, objectively, and analytically about situations and problems. It requires practice differentiating between relevant and irrelevant information, taking into consideration opposing points of view, and having more tolerance of others. More simply, as speaker and author John Coleman states in Chapter 8 of this guide, it is the ability to analyze and effectively break down an issue in order to make a decision or find a solution. Ultimately, critical thinking is a skill that allows you to use reasoning and logic to navigate your most challenging issues, whether a difficult problem, a tough decision, or a complex scenario. Critical thinking requires you to look at the situation from multiple perspectives and choose a well-informed and effective path forward. Fortunately, you can learn critical thinking. Whether you're just starting your career, are a seasoned executive, or are somewhere in between, this book helps you break down key elements of this leadership skill and offers practical ways to implement each. While these elements are not a start-to-finish process, learning about each one will help you fully understand what critical thinking entails. Get in the right mindset. Section 1 begins by helping you understand the basics of critical thinking, why this type of thinking is so difficult, and how to start putting it into practice. You'll discover how to avoid setting yourself up with a false state of urgency, giving yourself the time to think, and how to use the scientific method to think holistically about a problem right from the start. Observe the situation. We all bring our own assumptions to the decision-making process. The chapters in Section 2 help you identify them, break them down, and reach a broader view. They offer strategies for how to change the way you see, to look at the problem in new ways and reframe it. They also provide tips on how to adjust your viewpoints. Are you looking at the problem too granularly, or missing the details by focusing too broadly? Strategy expert Rosabeth Moss-Cantor provides questions to help you identify where you may need to zoom in or zoom out on an issue. Ask questions. Asking the right questions will supplement your observations and give you additional context to inform your thinking. Section 3 offers ways to shape your queries carefully so that you're getting the information you need. You'll learn about the 4 different types of questions you can ask, as well as how to dig into the details behind your data. You'll also discover how to word your inquiries, asking how instead of why to get the most value out of the answers. Seek differing perspectives. It's important to break your own cognitive biases by opening your mind to different perspectives. That means involving other people you may not normally interact with. Section 4 offers tactics for becoming more receptive to views that counter yours and helps you decide who to consult to break out of your routine ways of thinking and reveal your blind spots. You'll also identify which kinds of questions do and don't benefit from group discussion. Of course, opening yourself up or your ideas up to others' opinions may feel uncomfortable. This section also helps you to become a less defensive and more empathetic listener. Analyze the information. Preparation and discussion do very little if they don't lead to a path forward. Section 5 helps you to analyze the information you have and make a decision. You'll first understand how to think about data by asking how likely certain events will happen. Renowned management thinker and strategy expert Roger L. Martin discusses integrative thinking, in which you take 2 opposing ideas and generate a new one that is superior to both. You'll identify when it is appropriate to draw on your own experience while making your choice. The section also describes when to stop overthinking and trust your gut, and how to make smart decisions while facing uncertainty. Make critical thinking a habit. Applying these elements is not a one-and-done process. Without training your brain to think this way regularly, you're more likely to fall back into patterns that lead to suboptimal decisions. The last section offers ways to fold critical thinking into your daily work. You'll learn how self-reflection can help you think through surprises, failures, and frustrations to inform your future problem solving. You'll find ways to handle distractions and information overload. Finally, you'll learn to apply critical thinking to learning, using what you've discovered throughout the book to develop new skills, let go of bad habits, and build on your strengths. By listening to this guide, you'll be able to set aside your previous assumptions and more willingly open your mind to new data and fresh points of view you haven't considered before. You'll see how thinking differently and more critically about a problem can produce better results, sometimes in less time. And once you have gone through the process enough times, you'll be able to apply critical thinking to every situation you face. Section 1. Get in the right mindset. Chapter 1. Improve your critical thinking at work. An interview with Helen Liebweig by Kurt Nickisch. When faced with a complex issue, leaders often rely too heavily on their own expertise and then jump to conclusions quickly. But doing so can lead to mistakes, missed opportunities, and even failure. Instead, they should deliberately approach each problem and devote time to thinking through possible solutions. Helen Liebweig is the founder of the Reboot Foundation, a nonprofit that helps parents, teachers, and employers think more critically about their problems. In this interview, she discusses how anyone, whether they're at the top of their organization or just starting out in their career, can learn this essential skill. HBR. You say that many people's business problems really come down to simple errors in critical thinking. Why? Weig. At first glance, people believe that critical thinking is something that we do every day and it comes very naturally to us. But in reality, critical thinking is not only extremely important for success in life, but also something that needs to be learned and practiced. Critical thinking skills are predictive of making positive financial decisions, even more so than raw intelligence. But people forget what that actually means in terms of tools and practices that they need to exercise in order to make the right decisions, or at least better ones. Based on my 20 years of different turnaround and transformation experience, I have noticed that very often, when things go sideways, it's typically been because the leadership lacked some elements of critical thinking. Why do you think we lack critical thinking skills? One of the reasons why it's more difficult today is that we live in a world of incessant distraction, and technology is often to blame. When we have a question, we want instant gratification getting the information, just typing the question into Google and finding the answer quickly. So we don't have as much time to stop and think. Part of the necessity of critical thinking is having that ability to take a step back and think about your own thinking. It's becoming more and more essential. As businesses and technology evolve, competitive environments change rapidly, and there's more urgency to make decisions. That's exactly when we need to do more critical thinking than we used to. And getting better at critical thinking is something we can learn and cultivate? Yes. The opposite of critical thinking is selective thinking. Naturally selective thinking is something that you can do relatively quickly because it's just a reinforcement of your own opinion. People in business can get better at critical thinking if they just do 3 things: question assumptions, reason through logic, and diversify thought. How do you do that? Take a break. That doesn't mean doing meditation or yoga, but just taking time. It could be going for a run or taking a walk around the block. That alone creates an opportunity for an individual to stop and think. So that's one dimension people need to put in their normal practice. The second element is management of emotions. The times that you can imagine heated discussions or insults across the room, for instance. In that type of situation, it's very difficult to engage in rational thinking. When it comes to truly important decisions, we need to put aside the feelings and emotions that go awry in a meeting setting. And the third element is making sure that we have other points of view. When you talk about looking at things from opposing viewpoints, sometimes it's helpful to have somebody who plays that role, or a diverse team that you can share ideas with and explore. I don't know that all of us are good at thinking from other perspectives when we're just in our own thoughts. That's why I started off this conversation saying that critical thinking is something that you need to practice and learn. It's natural and human to stay in your own personal bubble because it's comfortable. But you can do this from a small scale to a larger scale. If you're starting small, if you work in accounting, for example, go have lunch with people in marketing in your organization. I have a good friend, Mathilde Thomas, who's the founder of Caudalie, a successful line of skincare products made from grapes. Mathilde grew up spending her time in her family vineyards. Her family originally was in the wine business. The idea of the skincare product came about because one day a friend of the family, a physician, came to visit the vineyard. He was looking at the vat of grape skins that were about to be discarded and said, "Well, that's a pot of treasure. Why are you just discarding that?" That's effectively how the business of Caudalie began. That's a positive story where people who are not necessarily in the same field can get together and come up with innovation. Here, it wasn't even intended to be an innovation. It just was an idea that sprang from two people from different walks of life coming up with the business idea. Another point you make is that people need to get better about reasoning through logic. Why is logic a deficit and a prerequisite for the critical thinking we need to see more of? One story I like to tell is about a company that I encountered a couple of years ago. It's one of the world's largest producers of aluminum tubes and has clients ranging from L'Oreal to Procter & Gamble. The CEO was blindsided by his own fervor and unreasonable optimism about the outlook for the revenue profile of the company. In reality, the company was in relatively dire financial straits, but he was blinded by his hope that his clients would never leave because their switching costs would be too high. That was his hypothesis. For some business leaders, optimism is a good thing. There wouldn't be Ubers or eBays if we didn't have the entrepreneurs who have charisma and exuberance. But I often find CEOs with something I call simply WTF, wishful thinking forever. Blind optimism can often mask the ability to reason through logic, question your approach, and say, well, can my customers decide to change vendors? Is the competitive environment actually shifting? Are there low-cost companies that could take over my business even if that hurdle rate is high? You must be able to ask the right questions, look at your business, and say, is there a different way of doing things? It comes back to the argument of having different views from your original assumptions and sentiments. To do that, we need to pay close attention to our own chain of logic. What should individuals do to get better at critical thinking? Be curious. Ask questions. What-if questions are great. Constantly challenge yourself by saying, what if I did something differently than the way I'm doing it now? What if I approached my client differently than the way I'm doing it now? What if I changed the processes? Would there be improvement? That's the type of individual who can improve by questioning the assumptions of what they are doing on a daily basis. Second, Be rigid about gathering facts and proof and accumulating data to truly justify why you're doing what you're doing. Pay close attention to the chain of your own logic. Last, expand your horizon by interacting with people who are not in your existing silo. Go have lunch or grab a drink with somebody who's not in your department. Reach out to somebody who's in a totally different building or even different division within your group. Helen, thanks for talking about thinking through how to be a better critical thinker. Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure.
Chapter 2. Beware the Urgency Trap by Jesse Sostrin. An unbridled urgency can be counterproductive and costly when you are faced with a complicated question or problem. If you're too quick to react, you can end up with short-sighted decisions or superficial solutions and neglect underlying causes and create collateral damage in the process. But if you're too deliberative and slow to respond, you can get caught flat-footed, potentially missing an opportunity or allowing an emergent challenge to consume you. To balance these two extremes, you need reflective urgency, the ability to bring conscious, rapid reflection to the priorities of the moment, to align your best thinking with the swiftest course of action. In my work developing and coaching leaders at every level through a variety of management dilemmas, I've developed 3 strategies to practice reflective urgency. Diagnose your urgency trap. To get started, you need to identify what's limiting your quality thinking time, the habitual, unconscious, and often counterproductive ways in which you push harder to get ahead when you feel the pressure of too many demands. Common urgency traps include ending a meeting prematurely, only to rush to the next one with more unfinished business, multitasking during work that requires your complete presence and full attention, which only diminishes the quality and accuracy of your output, and saying yes to projects that dilute your contribution and burn your energy when selectively saying no is the wiser choice. Traps like these keep you stuck in triage mode. In this mindset, taking time to reflect on your intentions and actions feels like a luxury you can't afford. But if you're able to spot your trap, then you can stop the self-defeating habits that keep you in a constant state of elevated urgency. For example, Jenna was a new manager struggling to adjust to the doiling pressures of delivering her own work while keeping the team accountable for theirs. As she tried to get it all done without any drop in performance, her urgency trap was an involuntary shift to extreme command and control. In her words, everything felt like an urgent crisis, so I acted like it was. This mindset triggered knee-jerk reactions to over-involve herself in delegated work and to communicate harshly by bottom-lining every email, one-on-one conversation, and team discussion. The result was that her team felt increasingly micromanaged and less engaged in their contributions. And because Jenna's conversations were all rushed and impersonal, she failed to deepen relationships and establish trust within the team. To stop leading with such an acute sense of urgency, Jenna made 2 changes. First, she got better at learning from her own experience. When demand spiked and she felt the instinct to control things as a means of staying ahead of the curve, she got out of her own way and followed through on previous delegation. Before sending a note to demand a progress update, she paused to review the timeline and task completion agreement already in place. This helped her avoid micromanaging the team, and it freed up time for her to focus on the big picture. Second, Jenna implemented a new communication habit to shift her leadership presence from cold and excessively direct to engaging and supportive. Before each conversation or meeting, she quietly considered 2 questions. What impact do I want to have on my team right now? After this interaction, what words do I want them to use to describe my influence? For Jenna, these 2 questions were straightforward enough to start applying immediately. The reflective act of pausing to review delegation agreements and to consider her communication impact was enough to jolt her out of the autopilot mode fueled by her urgency trap. Once you diagnose your own urgency trap, you can bring the same thoughtful reflection to your critical moments to disrupt the pattern. If you're unaware of what your trap is, answer the following prompt to explore it. When the demands I face increase and my capacity is stretched thin, a counterproductive habit I have is... Once you pinpoint the initial behavior, the unproductive thinking that holds it in place will be evident. Bring focus to the right priorities. Another problem is the unconscious tendency to focus on less important work because we enjoy it or we're good at the expense of our highest priorities. In his classic Harvard Business Review article, Skilled Incompetence, Chris Argyris, the influential MIT professor and organizational thinker, described how routine behaviors like this can become accepted norms when we fail to recognize and challenge ourselves to address them. This was true for Marcus, a senior leader who developed a habit of obsessing over administrative tasks. The busier he got, the more he slipped into tactical mode in order to check things off his to-do list as quickly as possible. It helped him feel productive, but failing to delegate these tasks meant he never had time to focus on longer-term, strategic issues. To shift this pattern, Marcus applied a quick reality test during pivotal moments of transition throughout his day. The task was to fill in the blanks to complete this sentence. I'm tempted to work on, but I know I should focus on. On the surface, this question seems obvious, but for Marcus, it was precisely the simplicity and ease of application that helped him combine reflection with quick action. The thoughtfulness embedded in the statement triggered a deliberative choice, one dictated not by the urgencies of the moment or easy tasks that felt gratifying to accomplish, but by his honest assessment of his highest priorities. Avoid extreme tilts. In a perfect world, you would fluidly pivot from reflection to action, but that's not the world you inhabit. You cannot reduce the demands you face, nor can you afford to attack them with the reckless abandon of unchecked urgency. But you can recognize that not every issue requires the same approach. Depending on the situation, you can consciously and subtly turn down or dial up the required elements of reflection and urgency. Haruto was the VP of sales for a technology company. In the midst of a major new product launch, he knew that he had to think very carefully about his team's strategy, but the pressure of impossible deadlines was constant. As a result, Haruto vacillated between the extremes of thoughtful reflection and urgent action. On some issues, he flexed toward too much deliberation, got lost in the details, and became bogged down with analysis paralysis. As a result, he appeared aloof and indifferent to others, and his response to emerging issues was slow and ineffective. But with other issues, he swung toward urgency. With a mindset of react first, think later, Haruto spent more time cleaning up his hasty decisions than he did making them. Haruto recognized that he needed to stop the pendulum swing and focus more on the subtle tilts toward greater urgency in some cases and a reflective stance in others. To do this, he used a 60-40 breakdown as a logic model to increase his situational agility. For each initiative, he assessed whether success relied more on urgent action or thoughtful reflection. If he determined that a 60% focus on action was required, for example for tactical routine work, Haruto would shrink the time and attention devoted to the work in order to favor efficiency. But if deliberation mattered more and action was only valued at 40%, for example for relationship-defining moments, innovation-specific work, and complex problem-solving, he expanded the time and deepened his focus to allow for dynamic thinking. In some cases, this was as simple as adding 20 minutes to an agenda to avoid the temptation to rush and leave half-considered issues on the table. In other instances, it was a matter of scheduling shorter meetings or setting self-imposed timelines to not get lost in the weeds. As you evaluate your daily responsibilities, avoid the temptation to treat every initiative the same. Knowing that you need the best of both and that a perfect 50-50 split is unrealistic, Make the subtle tilts toward reflection and action as needed to get.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?